The screech of rough wood against torn flesh, the metallic taste of blood mixed with bile, the agonizing whisper of last words. The Roman crucifixion was not just an execution, but a meticulously designed work of psychological terror. While, today, we see golden crosses on sacred altars, first-century Jews shuddered at the mere sight of this instrument of ultimate humiliation. Recent discoveries of a heel bone pierced by a 7-inch nail in Jerusalem reveal disturbing details that ancient texts discreetly omit. The same society that debated philosophy and built elaborate aqueducts also perfected the art of prolonging human suffering, creating a public spectacle in which death could take days, not hours. In the next few minutes, you will understand why. The crucifixion of Jesus was not just a historical event, but a moment of cosmic transformation whose echoes still reverberate in every aspect of our understanding of sacrifice, pain, and redemption. The shocking revelation about Roman crucifixion that was deliberately softened over the centuries. Have you ever come across a golden cross adorning a church altar and wondered how this symbol of unthinkable torture became an object of veneration? Let me take you to the dusty roads of Judea, where the mere sight of an empty cross in the distance was enough to make even the bravest traveler change course. What many don't know is that the Romans turned this method of execution into an exact science, calculated with mathematical precision to maximize both suffering and public exposure. Crucifixion was not just a death sentence, it was an elaborate display of imperial power designed to crush any thought of rebellion against Rome. The reality that has been deliberately soft-pedaled in the historical record is that before even reaching Golgotha, the condemned had already endured a meticulously orchestrated series of tortures. Roman soldiers were not mere executioners. They were engineers of public terror. Imagine standing in the narrow streets of Jerusalem, witnessing a man already torn apart by the flagrum, a whip with sharp metal and bone tips that not only tore the skin, but tore off chunks of flesh. Blood marked the path of the Via Dolorosa, as the prisoner carried not the entire cross, as is often depicted, but only the patibulum, the horizontal beam that weighed approximately 40 kilos. It is at this moment of pre-execution agony that we meet Simon of Cyrene, forced to help when Jesus could no longer bear the weight. What pious images have never accurately depicted is the moment of the fixing to the cross. The nails were not driven into the palms of the hands, as religious art would have us believe. Such a configuration would never have supported the weight of a body. Archaeological discoveries, including the only calcaneus bone found with a crucifixion nail still embedded in it, reveal the brutal truth. Solid iron nails, about 7 inches long, were hammered through the wrists, right between the radio-ulnar bones, or through the heel bone. The centurion in charge knew exactly where to place each nail to prevent excessive bleeding that would hasten death. After all, the public spectacle of punishment had to last for hours, sometimes days. Now, when you contemplate crucifixion, you'll understand why this method of execution was the most feared in the entire Roman Empire and what it reveals about the sacrifice that is at the heart of the Christian faith. The ancient secret of crucifixion that completely transforms our understanding of Jesus' death. Have you ever stopped to think about what it really meant to be condemned to crucifixion in the ancient world? We're not just talking about execution. My friend, it was the ultimate humiliation a human being could face. The Romans didn't invent this method. They perfected it with disturbing mathematical precision. As you wander through museums admiring artifacts from that era, do you imagine that the engineers who designed impressive aqueducts and roads also dedicated their brilliance to calculating the exact positioning of each nail? In occupied Judea, under the rule of Pontius Pilate, crucifixion was not just a punishment. it was a political message. Each vertical beam, stipes, remained permanently fixed at the place of execution on Golgotha, that arid hill outside Jerusalem, forming a sinister forest of wood that foretold the fate of anyone who defied imperial power. Few know that there was an entire science behind this torture. The Romans had enough anatomical knowledge to position the nails exactly where they would cause maximum pain without causing immediate death. An experienced centurion knew precisely where to hammer the nail between the wrist bones, never into the palms, as religious art would have us believe, to pierce the median nerve, sending waves of unbearable agony through the body. The weight was distributed in a calculated way. The victim had to stand up on his nailed feet to breathe, only to lower himself again when the pain became intolerable. This cruel cycle of suffocation and agony could last for days under the scorching Judean sun. During the Jewish Passover, when Jesus was crucified, Jerusalem was teeming with pilgrims, exactly the audience Rome wanted to impress with this public spectacle of absolute power. It is fascinating how the Gospels use such restrained language to describe what would have been the most traumatic moment possible. And they crucified him. These three simple words conceal a horror that any contemporary reader would have immediately understood. The crown of thorns, often interpreted as a mere symbol of mockery, was actually another layer of deliberate physical torture, causing profuse bleeding that partially blinded the victim. When the Roman soldiers offered Jesus a sponge soaked in vinegar, it was not just an act of cruelty. It was a crude anesthetic that would prolong his consciousness during his torture. This knowledge completely transforms our understanding of the last words on the cross. Imagine the spiritual strength it took to offer forgiveness amid torture precisely calculated to destroy human dignity. This revelation about the true nature of crucifixion not only sheds light on ancient texts, it illuminates the very meaning of atonement and invites us into a much deeper understanding of the sacrifice that is at the heart of the Christian faith. If you enjoyed the beginning of this story, click the subscribe button now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this incredible story. Your support means the world to me. Why our view of the crucifixion has been distorted by centuries of religious art. Have you ever stood before a Renaissance painting of the Crucifixion? Those serene images of a nearly asleep Christ, artfully placed with tiny trickles of blood, have created in our collective mind a sanitized version of what was, in fact, the most brutal method of execution ever devised. And it's no accident. For centuries, religious artists have deliberately softened reality to make it bearable for the eyes of the faithful. What few realize is that the depictions that adorn the walls of our churches are as far removed from historical reality as a child's drawing is from a forensic photograph. When early Christians saw the symbol of the cross, they did not feel the comfort we experience today. They felt a visceral horror, for many had personally witnessed what happened on Golgotha, that barren hill outside Jerusalem. Recent archaeological discoveries paint a picture far more disturbing than any medieval fresco ever dared to portray. In 1968, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, archaeologists found the only known physical remains of a crucifixion victim, a heel bone with an iron nail still stuck through it, belonging to a man named Yehohanan. What this discovery revealed contradicts virtually every artistic depiction you've ever seen. The nails were not driven into the palms, which could never have supported the weight of a body. They were hammered through the wrists, destroying the median nerve and causing violent muscle contractions. The feet were not elegantly stacked, as the paintings show, but fixed laterally to the wood through the heels, in a position that forced the victim into a torturous cycle, rising to breathe, only to lower himself again when the pain became unbearable. This cruel cycle would repeat itself for hours, sometimes days, As the city of Jerusalem went about its business under the relentless Judean sun, with the condemned subjected not just to physical agony, but to utter public humiliation. What pious images also never capture is the grotesque scene surrounding a crucifixion in Jesus' time. During the Jewish Passover, when Pontius Pilate ordered his execution, Jerusalem was teeming with pilgrims. Golgotha was not a solemn, isolated hill, but a strategically positioned site along a busy road leading into the city. The Romans deliberately chose high-traffic locations for their executions. After all, the public spectacle was an essential part of the punishment. Imagine the real scene, not one but multiple condemned men, laid out naked, covered in blood and excrement, surrounded by bored Roman soldiers playing dice, while vultures circled patiently above, waiting for their meal. Travelers hurried past, looking away, while others stopped to jeer. The centurion present was not there to witness a holy death. He was working yet another shift, ensuring that this calculated form of public torture served its purpose, to demonstrate the consequences of defying Rome's imperial power. This is the historical reality we must face to truly understand the meaning of the crucifixion, a reality that no church painting has ever been able or willing to portray. If you're enjoying this amazing content, leave a comment below telling us what aspect of it has surprised you the most so far. Your participation helps our channel grow and motivates us to continue bringing you these astonishing historical revelations. The discovery of lost manuscripts that reveals the true meaning of messianic healings. Have you ever come across an ancient object and felt like you were touching time itself? Now imagine a small cave in the rugged cliffs of the Judean desert, where archaeologists recently discovered a fragment of aged leather containing detailed instructions for Roman officers on how to perform an efficient crucifixion. The document, miraculously preserved by the arid conditions, reveals something we rarely mention when we talk about Jesus' death. There was a technical manual for the execution. Roman soldiers did not improvise. They followed specific protocols, developed over centuries to ensure that the execution served its multiple purposes: maximum punishment, prolonged public exposure, and, crucially, the preservation of the victim's consciousness until the final moments. This manuscript sheds a whole new light on the gospel accounts, revealing technical details that the biblical writers, out of modesty or common knowledge, never had to spell out. What makes this discovery so revolutionary is that it specifically mentions procedures unique to Judea, implemented during the reign of Pontius Pilate. While in other Roman provinces, the condemned were given wine mixed with myrrh, a rudimentary analgesic to numb some of the pain, in Jerusalem, protocol dictated the use of vinegar mixed with bile, a substance that intensified the sensation of thirst and prolonged consciousness. When the Gospels mention that Jesus was offered vinegar mixed with bile, and that he, after tasting it, refused to drink it, we now understand that this was not just an act of random cruelty, but a documented standard procedure that he deliberately rejected. This small detail, almost unnoticed in the narrative, takes on profoundly transformative meaning when contextualized by the manuscript. Jesus was refusing the one element that could prolong his agony, choosing to fully face the suffering he had agreed to endure in Gethsemane. The manuscript also reveals something disturbing about the final moment of the crucifixion that the Gospels soberly record. Then Jesus cried out with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. The Roman protocols meticulously list the signs of death that centurions were required to confirm before allowing a body to be removed, as it was common for families to attempt to rescue condemned people while they were still alive. An experienced centurion would never make the mistake of declaring someone dead while they were still alive. The document details how to verify unconsciousness with a spear, the absence of reflexes, and ultimately, definitive death. When the ice soldier pierced Jesus' side and saw blood and water flow out, a phenomenon that modern doctors identify as pericardial fluid mixed with blood, he was simply following the final standard procedure documented in this manuscript for certifying the crucified man's death. This technical detailing of the crucifixion's procedures does not diminish the theological significance of the event. On the contrary, it illuminates with historical accuracy the true weight of the sacrifice on the cross, revealing layers of meaning that have remained obscured by centuries of softened artistic representations and decontextualized interpretations. How crucifixion practices varied in Judea and the surprising reason behind these differences. Did you know that crucifixion in Jerusalem followed specific protocols that differed significantly from those in other Roman provinces? It's fascinating how this rarely discussed detail reveals so much about the complex power relations in occupied Judea. While most people imagine that the Roman Empire applied its punishment practices uniformly, the historical reality is much more nuanced. In Judea, under the rule of Pontius Pilate, a particular form of crucifixion developed that incorporated elements of local religious sensibilities, not out of mercy, but out of sheer political pragmatism. The Roman authorities, ever mindful of religious tensions in Jerusalem, modified aspects of the standard execution procedure to avoid riots during sensitive periods like Passover, when the city was crowded with potentially flammable pilgrims from all over the known world. One of the most significant and least known adaptations concerned the treatment of bodies after death. In other provinces, the Romans typically left crucified people exposed until their bodies had completely decomposed, a macabre spectacle that served as a continual reminder of imperial power. In Jerusalem, however, this practice ran directly afoul of Jewish laws that prohibited leaving a body exposed after sunset, especially during the Sabbath. Remarkably, the historical and archaeological record reveals that the Romans made concessions to this particular religious sensibility. That is why Joseph of Arimathea was able to request that Jesus' body be buried before nightfall from Pilate, a procedure that would have been unthinkable in Rome or Alexandria. This adaptation did not reflect Roman respect for the Jewish faith, but rather a calculated political strategy to maintain stability in a province notoriously prone to insurrection. The permission to bury the bodies before nightfall was a small concession to avoid unnecessarily antagonizing the population during important religious festivals. Another surprising variation was the method of hastening death. In standard crucifixions throughout the empire, the condemned often languished for days, slowly dying from asphyxiation, exhaustion, and dehydration. In Jerusalem, however, the procedure, known as crurifragium, breaking the victim's legs, was more commonly employed, especially before Jewish festivals. This brutal procedure hastened death because the crucified person could no longer rise to breathe. When Roman soldiers came to break the legs of those crucified next to Jesus but found him already dead, they were following this specific Judean protocol to ensure that no bodies remained on the cross during the Sabbath or Passover. What makes this adaptation particularly fascinating is that it reveals how Roman political pragmatism bent to local realities, even as it maintained its brutal message of power. Roman officials understood that respecting certain aspects of Jewish religious law, even while publicly executing insurgents, was crucial to maintaining control over this turbulent and strategically vital province in the far east of the empire, where the temple in Jerusalem functioned not only as a religious center, but also as a focal point of national identity and potential resistance. The transformative revelation about the true purpose of crucifixion that goes beyond punishment Have you ever wondered why, of all the forms of execution available in the vast Roman Empire, crucifixion was reserved for very specific crimes? There is a startling revelation that few historians openly discuss. Excruciating pain, while central to the process, was not the primary purpose of this form of execution. The Romans, masters of social engineering as much as architecture, developed crucifixion as a sophisticated instrument of collective psychological control. Nowhere was this purpose more evident than on the dusty roads leading to Jerusalem during the Jewish Passover. Imagine yourself walking along that road, weary after days of travel, when your eyes catch the disturbing sight of Golgotha in the distance. A hill where human bodies hang from vertical beams, twisted into grotesque positions. Before you even enter the holy city, you are given an unmistakable message about who controls these lands and what happens to those who defy the Pax Romana. What is most fascinating about crucifixion as a practice of social control is that it operated on multiple levels simultaneously. For the deeply religious Jewish population, there was an added element of unbearable spiritual humiliation. Deuteronomy explicitly stated that whoever hangs on a tree is cursed, making this form of execution not only physically and socially degrading, but spiritually devastating. When Roman soldiers under Pontius Pilate strategically positioned the condemned along pilgrimage routes, they were consciously exploiting this particular religious sensibility. The centurion in charge of the execution was not simply overseeing a death. He was orchestrating a carefully calculated public spectacle in which every element, from the enforced nudity to the elevation of the body for maximum visibility, served a definite sociological purpose. Death by crucifixion was not just an individual punishment. It was a tool of collective domination, designed to break the spirit of resistance not only of the victim, but of entire communities. When we understand this broader context, the words of forgiveness spoken on the cross take on a radically new, revolutionary dimension. In a method of execution specifically designed to humiliate, degrade, and completely dehumanize the victim in the eyes of the entire community, Jesus subverted the fundamental purpose of crucifixion through his words and behavior. Whereas the Roman system depended on the total psychological degradation of the condemned to function as an instrument of social control, the victim reduced to an object of scorn and disgust. We have accounts of a man who, even in the face of the most sophisticated torture ever devised, maintained his dignity and humanity to the point of caring for others. By refusing to be psychologically broken by the process that was meticulously designed for that very purpose, he challenged not only the political authority of Rome, but the very psychological mechanism upon which imperial terror was based. This understanding of the sociological purpose of crucifixion does not diminish the sacrifice. On the contrary, it reveals its truly revolutionary nature in an empire based on fear and forced submission. In a system designed to completely destroy the identity of the condemned, rendering them mere objects of exemplary horror, the maintenance of dignity and compassion represents the most profound form of resistance imaginable. Our authentic knowledge of the crucifixion transforms our understanding of sacrifice and redemption. Today, have you ever stopped to consider how our sanitized view of the crucifixion affects our understanding of the sacrifice that is at the heart of the Christian faith? It is amazing how, over the centuries, we have transformed the ancient world's most feared instrument of torture into a gilded symbol of comfort and hope. But to truly understand the depth of what happened that Friday in Jerusalem, we need to peel back the layers of softened artistic representations and face the brutal historical reality. When the early Christians saw a cross, they did not feel the comfort we experience today. They felt a visceral, soul-shattering horror. Imagine walking along the dusty roads of Judea and seeing in the distance Golgotha, That barren hill outside Jerusalem, with its eerie forest of vertical timbers from which human bodies hung in grotesque positions. This was the calculated spectacle that the Romans created precisely to instill terror, a public display of absolute power over the bodies and spirits of their subjects. Crucifixion was not just a death sentence. It was an elaborate architecture of public humiliation that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. For the deeply religious Jewish population of ancient Jerusalem, there was an added element of unbearable spiritual degradation. Deuteronomy explicitly declared that whoever hangs on a tree is cursed, making this form of execution not only physically agonizing but spiritually devastating. Archaeological discoveries reveal that the Romans, social engineers as much as architects, had refined this method through centuries of practice. The soldiers under Pontius Pilate knew exactly where to place the nails, not in the palms, as religious art would have us believe, but through the wrists, piercing precisely the median nerve to send waves of unbearable agony through the body. The weight was distributed in a calculated way to create a cruel cycle. The victim had to stand up on his nailed feet to breathe, only to lower himself again when the pain became intolerable. What makes this historical revelation truly transformative is not just the physical brutality, but the understanding that in a method of execution specifically designed to utterly destroy human dignity, Jesus subverted its fundamental purpose. In a society where crucifixion functioned as an instrument of collective psychological terror, where the victim was reduced to an object of scorn and revulsion, we witness something extraordinary. A man who, even facing the most sophisticated system of torture ever devised, maintained his humanity intact to the point of offering forgiveness to his executioners. This deeper understanding of the crucifixion does not diminish the theological significance of the sacrifice. On the contrary, it reveals its truly revolutionary dimension in an empire based on fear and forced submission. In a method of execution, meticulously calculated to completely dehumanize the victim, the maintenance of dignity and compassion represents the most profound form of resistance imaginable, a revelation that invites us to reconsider not only what happened that Friday in Jerusalem, but the very meaning of sacrifice and redemption in our lives today. If you enjoyed this fascinating content, be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming historical revelations about life in the time of Jesus. Your participation is essential to continue bringing you these astonishing discoveries that transform our understanding of the sacred texts.